The night train cut through the Polish countryside like a quiet thought, its steel rhythm keeping time with the breath of sleeping strangers. It was late winter, 1989, the kind of cold that bit through wool and into bone. In carriage 6, under the low hum of flickering lamps, a 3-year-old boy slept curled beneath a rough gray blanket, a tiny wooden horse clutched to his chest. No one claimed him when the ticket inspector passed. No one answered when the conductor asked, "Chia to Jetsko? Whose child is this?" Marek, the conductor with the heavy coat and the softer heart, crouched down to the child's level. The boy's cheeks were pink from the chilled air sneaking in at the window sill. His breath came even and trusting. Marek scanned the compartment. 2 students headed to Łódź, a seamstress returning from Krakow, an old man with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much history, and felt a prickle of unease along his neck. The train swayed. The boy didn't wake. Marek lifted the blanket edge to look for a ticket pinned to his sweater. A note, perhaps. Nothing. Only the wooden horse, hand-carved, painted once with care, and now scuffed at the nose. By the time the train slid into Wrocław Główny, a thin blue dawn was blanching the platform. The boy stirred, blinked owlishly at the world, and tightened his small fingers around the toy. When Marek asked his name, the child murmured something like "Danio" in a sleep-heavy voice. It was enough for Marek to write Daniel on the incident report later, the name a makeshift bridge between strangers. At the small police outpost by the station, the radiators clanged like angry bells and the coffee tasted of tin. The officers listened, shrugged, made a few phone calls. In those days, lost and left behind lived too close together in the language of hardship. The newspapers wrote a few uncertain lines. Boy found on night train, mother unknown, and a radio presenter coined a phrase that stuck: the ghost train boy. For a week, people sent sweaters and sweets to the orphanage on the outskirts, as if fabric and sugar could mend what was broken. He adjusted to routine the way children do, with the resilience of a sapling in wind. A woman named Zofia at the orphanage brushed his hair with slow, careful strokes, and whispered bedtime stories about horses that remembered the way home. When he cried at night, it wasn't loud. It was a closed-in, hiccuping grief that made Zofia press her palm to his back and count heartbeats. He had fragments of memory, drifting like snowflakes he couldn't catch. The smell of hay, a woman's voice saying "Kochani," the soft joy of warm bread. He learned to say please and thank you, to eat quickly, to tuck the wooden horse under his pillow so it wouldn't vanish while he slept. In spring, 2 visitors from England arrived, a couple with careful smiles and the kind of sadness that comes from wanting a child for too long. Their names were Ellen and Michael Turner. They spoke a halting Polish learned from cassettes and a phrase book with dog-eared corners. They knelt to his height, asked if he liked apples, and produced a red one so perfect it looked painted. Daniel ran his thumb over the skin, felt the coolness, then glanced toward Zofia, as if permission were a new language too. Adoption is paperwork and patience and prayers set into the space between days. By the time Daniel left Poland, summer had set fields ablaze with gold. Marek came to the platform to watch him go. He tipped his cap at the small boy who once slept through the fear of a night train. "Powodzenia," he said. "Good luck." Daniel pressed the wooden horse to the window, a silent salute, and the train took him toward a life that would teach him new words for home. London in the 1990s was a collage of rain and red buses and Saturday mornings at street markets. Ellen showed Daniel how to frame the world in rectangles by giving him a disposable camera on his 9th birthday. "Photographs help us remember," she told him, "even when we think we've forgotten." His first picture was of sunlight on a puddle, a child's intuition for reflection. He kept the wooden horse on a shelf above his bed, beside a jar of coins and a paper crane. Sometimes, alone, he traced the scratches in the paint as though they were runes that might unlock a voice he could no longer hear. Years later, when he was 27 and making a living with a camera slung across his chest, strangers admired how Daniel Turner photographed absence as if it were a real thing. Space at a table, a chair turned slightly from the window, train platforms lit by arrivals that never came. He didn't tell them that every shutter click felt like knocking on a door he'd once slept behind. How many of us carry questions we're afraid to ask out loud? He did not know that an answer waited in a place he passed every day, tucked into a box he never had the courage to open. He did not know that the past had already crossed oceans to sit quietly on a shelf in his mother's wardrobe, patient as a train on a siding, waiting for the signal to change. But then something unexpected happened. If this first part hooked you, would you keep watching? What would you do with a mystery you could hold in your hand? If you're invested in Daniel's journey, like this episode and share your guesses in the comments, someone might spot the clue he missed. The sound of rain on London rooftops had always soothed Daniel. It was steady, predictable, unlike the patchwork of his memories. He had built a quiet life out of focus and light, freelance photography, long walks through Brixton Market, evenings spent in dim cafes editing portraits of strangers. To everyone who knew him, he was composed, patient, a man who saw beauty where others saw ordinary. But behind that calm, something had started to shift. It began the night Ellen Turner, the only mother he had ever truly known, passed away. Her illness had been slow, giving Daniel time to prepare. Yet when it finally came, he realized that grief never respected schedules. The house in Clapham felt hollow, her laughter reduced to an echo trapped in wallpaper. In the weeks that followed, Daniel wandered from room to room with his camera but couldn't bring himself to take a single photograph. While sorting through Ellen's belongings, he found a small wooden box at the back of her wardrobe, tied with a faded ribbon. It was lighter than he expected. Inside, beneath a folded handkerchief, lay an old train ticket, Warszawa Główna to Wrocław Główny, 1989. The date was smudged, but the meaning hit him like a rush of cold air. Tucked beside it was a black and white photograph, a young woman holding a toddler, both bundled in winter coats, snowflakes frozen mid-air. He turned the photo over. There, in Ellen's handwriting, were 3 words. Found with him. The phrase twisted something deep inside him. Found with him. The words were evidence and question in one breath. He sat down on the floor, the rain still drumming overhead, and realized that for the first time in his adult life, he had no idea who he was. Over the next days, Daniel avoided his work assignments. Instead, he began researching. He searched old Polish newspapers online, using translation tools and stubborn patience. After hours of scrolling, he found it, a small article yellowed and pixelated. Boy found on night train, mother unknown. The photo was blurry, but he recognized himself instantly. The same wooden horse, the same blanket. His heart pounded as he read about the conductor, a man named Marek Kowalski, who had discovered him sleeping alone on the train. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked the city until dawn, following the glow of streetlights reflected in puddles. Each reflection felt like a doorway to another version of himself. Was he ready to open it? He made his decision the next morning. He booked a flight to Warsaw for the following week. "It's time," he whispered to the photo. When the plane touched down, he felt both foreign and familiar. The air carried the crisp scent of pine and diesel, the same smell that haunted his earliest dreams. He rented a small apartment near Nowy Świat, walls bare except for one photo he brought from home, the woman and child. His first visit was to the National Archives. The building smelled of dust and ink, a mausoleum for forgotten lives. After hours of searching, a kind archivist named Marta brought him a folder marked 1989, Missing and Found Children. Inside were police reports, adoption papers, and a witness statement signed by Marek Kowalski. Daniel traced the signature with his finger. "Do you know if this man is still alive?" he asked. Marta adjusted her glasses, scanning her screen. "Kowalski, yes, there's a record. He retired years ago. Lives near Wrocław." She looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "You're looking for your family, aren't you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I guess I'm looking for myself." Outside, snow had begun to fall. Gentle, tentative, like a memory returning. He caught a flake on his glove and watched it vanish. Somewhere between the white silence and the pulse of the city, he felt something awaken, a thread pulling him toward the place where it all began. He rented a car and began the drive south, toward Wrocław. The road stretched endlessly, lined with pines and patches of fog. Every passing train sent a low hum through his chest, as if calling him by the name he'd forgotten. He didn't know that at the end of this road waited a man who had kept a secret for 30 years, one that would change everything Daniel thought he knew about his past and about love itself. But as the lights of the city began to appear on the horizon, Daniel whispered a promise to the night. "I'm ready to remember." The village of Owawa lay just outside Wrocław, where the fields turned soft with mist each morning. Daniel followed the GPS through narrow roads bordered by birch trees until he reached a small yellow house with a sagging fence. A wooden sign read Kowalski in faded letters. He parked, heart hammering, the same rhythm as that long-ago train. An old man opened the door before Daniel could knock. His shoulders were stooped, but his eyes were alert and kind. "You must be Mr. Turner," he said in careful English. Marta called ahead. Marek Kowalski hadn't changed much from the photograph Daniel had found online. Weathered face, hands of a man who'd worked with machines all his life. Inside, the air smelled of tea and oil paint. A painting of a train hung above the fireplace. "I never thought I'd see you again," Marek murmured, gesturing to a chair. "You were so small. You didn't even cry when we found you." Daniel swallowed, trying to find words. "Do you remember anything about that night? Was there anyone else?" Marek took a slow breath, eyes drifting to the window. "There was a woman," he said finally. "I didn't see her, but another passenger swore she got off at the last minute. Left something behind, maybe on purpose, maybe not. No one knew. The police tried to find her, but those were chaotic times. People disappeared into trains as if they were fog." Daniel leaned forward. "Do you remember anything about her?" Marek hesitated, then shuffled to a cabinet. He returned with a small envelope yellowed with age. "I kept this," he said. "I don't know why. Maybe I thought one day you'd come back." Inside was a clipping from a 1989 newspaper, the same story Daniel had already seen, but below it was another article, one he hadn't. It was about a woman named Ania Zielinska, reported missing the same week the boy was found. A grainy photo showed her face, young, soft eyes full of tired hope. The world seemed to tilt. Daniel felt as though the air had been punched from his lungs. The resemblance was faint, but real. The same curve of the jaw, the same dark eyes he saw every time he looked in the mirror. "Do you think she could be?" "I think," Marek said carefully, "that some truths are patient. They wait until we are old enough to hear them." Daniel left with the envelope tucked inside his jacket. Outside, the clouds were low and gray, and the wind carried the scent of iron and rain. He stopped by the old Wrocław station before returning to his hotel. The platforms were almost empty now, the electronic boards replacing the old click-clack signs. He stood where the conductor had once found him, the sound of an approaching train echoing like a memory through the cold air. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, fragments stirred. A lullaby hummed in a soft female voice, the smell of apples, a sudden flash of fear. Then motion, endless motion, the rocking of a train. When he opened his eyes again, he felt it, the unmistakable pull of something unfinished. Back in his hotel room, he opened his laptop and searched for Ania Zielinska, heart pounding. The name was common, yielding dozens of results, most irrelevant. But one caught his attention, an article from a small-town newsletter dated only a few years ago. It mentioned an elderly woman named Ania Zielinska, living in a nursing home in Poznan. The detail that froze him was this: she spent her days carving small wooden animals for the children in the ward. Wooden animals. He reached into his bag, pulled out the old horse, and stared at it for a long time. The paint had faded, but the shape, the texture, it was the same. His hands trembled. Could it be? The next morning he packed his camera, the photo, and the horse. The drive to Poznan took nearly 5 hours. Every mile felt like peeling away a layer of time. When he arrived, the afternoon light slanted through clouds, casting long shadows over the pale brick nursing home. At the reception, a nurse looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for a resident," Daniel said. "Her name is Ania Zielinska." The nurse smiled softly. "She's in the garden. She loves the afternoons." Daniel's heart thudded painfully as he followed the path outside. The sound of birds mixed with the slow rustle of wind in the trees. Ahead, an elderly woman sat at a table, carving something from a block of wood. Her gray hair was braided neatly. Her hands trembled slightly but moved with familiar care. Daniel stopped a few meters away, unable to speak. Then she looked up. Her eyes widened, as if she had been waiting for him all her life. The wooden carving slipped from her hand. And Daniel finally whispered, "Mother?" For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air in the garden thickened with something too heavy to name: shock, disbelief, the trembling edge of recognition. Daniel felt every sound around him fade. The wind, the birds, even his heartbeat seemed to wait for her answer. Anya's lips parted, trembling. "Daniel?" she whispered, her accent soft and melodic, the syllables carrying the ghost of a lullaby. "It can't be." He stepped closer, tears already welling in his eyes. "You carved this," he said, pulling the small wooden horse from his bag. "Didn't you?" Her trembling hand reached for it, fingertips grazing the chipped paint. The moment she touched it, her breath hitched. "I made this for my son," she said, voice breaking. "He loved horses. He wouldn't sleep without it." Daniel's knees went weak. He knelt beside her, holding the toy between them like an offering to time itself. "I was found alone on a train," he said. "In 1989. A conductor named Marek saved me. They said no one ever came forward." Her eyes filled, and her hand flew to her mouth as if to stifle a sob. "Oh, dear God," she murmured. They told me my child died that night." Daniel blinked, stunned. "What do you mean?" Anya's hands trembled as she spoke. "We were running. There was violence in the town then, protests, danger everywhere. My husband was gone, Owang. The factory strikes had turned ugly. I was trying to take you to my sister in Wrocław. I remember the lights going out on the train, people screaming, pushing. I must have been knocked unconscious. When I woke up, you were gone. The police said a child's body had been found near the tracks. I believed them. I lost everything that night. My home, my family, my will to live." She wiped her eyes with a shaky hand. "I moved here years later. I never remarried. I kept carving because it was the only thing that reminded me of him." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Of you." Daniel couldn't breathe. The world tilted, memories colliding like storm clouds, flashes of cold, the sound of metal, a woman's scream. The lullaby he'd half remembered his whole life began to hum inside his head, clearer now, real. He reached out and took her hand. It was fragile, veins like blue threads beneath translucent skin. Yet her grip was fierce, desperate. "I found you," he said softly. "After all these years, I found you." She smiled through tears, tracing his face with her fingers, as if memorizing him anew. "I prayed every night that somehow you were alive," she whispered, "and you came back to me." They sat in silence for a while, the past wrapping around them like fog. Daniel showed her the photograph Ellen had kept, the one of a woman and a child in the snow. Anya's voice caught. "That was the last day before the train?" she said. "My sister took it. I never saw the photo again." Daniel hesitated. "Ellen, my adoptive mother, kept it safe all these years. She wrote, 'Found with him' on the back." Anya smiled faintly. "Then she was an angel. She gave you what I couldn't." Daniel nodded, his heart a storm of gratitude and grief. "She was. She raised me with love, but I always felt there was something missing, like a song without its last note." Anya's eyes met his, wet but shining. "Now you've heard it." He stayed with her the whole afternoon, listening to her stories. Of the Poland she'd known, the loss she'd endured, the years she spent alone. When the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the garden, Ania took his hand again. "Do you forgive me?" she asked quietly. Tears blurred his vision. "There's nothing to forgive." A faint smile curved her lips. "Then my heart can rest." Before leaving, Daniel promised to return the next day. She nodded, content, her eyes following him until he disappeared through the gate. That night, in a small hotel near the city center, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stared at the wooden horse on the nightstand, the same toy that had carried a lifetime of unanswered questions. Now it was no longer a relic of mystery. It was proof of love that had survived the impossible. Yet as he drifted between wakefulness and dream, a thought crept in, quiet, but insistent. If Ellen had known this photograph came from Ania, why had she never told him? And what else might she have hidden? Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, thin and golden, washing the hotel room in quiet calm. Daniel lay awake, his mind chasing fragments of memory and new questions that wouldn't settle. Finding Anya had filled the emptiness inside him, but something about Ellen's note, found with him, still tugged at him like a loose thread. After breakfast, he sat by the window with his laptop and began to read through the adoption documents again. There were gaps, dates that didn't match, pages missing, and one name kept reappearing, E. Nowak, listed as an intermediary between the Polish authorities and the British Adoption Agency. He frowned. Ellen's maiden name was Nowak. A sudden realization chilled him. Could it be possible that Ellen had known more than she'd ever said? He returned to the nursing home that afternoon. Anya was waiting for him in the garden, dressed in a pale blue shawl, her eyes brighter than the day before. They spent hours walking among the trees. He told her about his life in London, the photography, the markets, the laughter he'd shared with Ellen. When he mentioned her last name, Ania stopped walking. Nowak? She repeated softly. Ellen Nowak? Daniel turned to her, startled. You knew her? Ania pressed a hand to her heart, breath trembling. She was my cousin, she whispered. My mother's sister's child. We lost contact when she emigrated to England in the early 80s. I didn't even know she was still alive. The air seemed to collapse around him. That means she knew. Anya nodded slowly. Maybe she recognized you. Maybe she saw your name in the reports or the photograph and she knew who you were. But she also knew how broken I was back then. Perhaps she wanted to protect us both, to give you a stable life while keeping my memory alive in her heart. Daniel felt tears gather again, hot and confused. He sat on a bench beside her, his voice barely a whisper. All these years she carried that secret. Not out of cruelty, Anya said gently. Out of love. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear Ellen's voice again. Photographs help us remember even when we think we've forgotten. Maybe she had never forgotten. Maybe she had remembered too much. Later that evening, Daniel returned to his hotel and opened his old photo archive. Among the thousands of images he'd taken over the years, one caught his attention. A picture from Ellen's final birthday, a few months before her death. In it, she was smiling beside the same wooden horse, her fingers resting on it as though she were passing it on. He zoomed in, and there, half hidden on the underside of the toy, was something he had never noticed before. A faintly carved word in Polish. Miłość. Love. He laughed through the tears that came, a sound halfway between joy and ache. The horse had carried 3 decades of love. From Anya to Ellen, from Ellen to him, and now, full circle, back to where it belonged. The next morning, Daniel returned to the nursing home with the horse in his hand. He placed it gently in Anya's palms. It's home, he said simply. Anya's eyes glistened. So are you. They embraced, the years between them collapsing into a single heartbeat. Around them, the garden was filled with the scent of lilacs and the quiet hum of life continuing. A week later, back in London, Daniel visited Ellen's grave. He brought with him a photograph, one of him and Anya in the garden, both smiling, the wooden horse between them. He placed it against the headstone and whispered, You kept your promise. You made sure I found her. Then lifting his camera, he took one final picture, the light falling softly over her name, the trees bending gently above. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. He finally understood that love wasn't something you lose. It changes shape, travels across borders, hides in boxes and photographs, even in carved wood. It waits, patient as a train on its track, until you are ready to board. As he turned to leave, a train horn echoed faintly in the distance. The sound carried through the air like a farewell and a beginning all at once. And for the first time in his life, Daniel smiled without wondering who he was. He already knew. Sometimes the past doesn't return to haunt us. It comes back to heal us. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit like to honor Daniel's journey and subscribe for more true and emotional stories like this one. What would you have done if you found out your past was hiding just one train away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone who's still searching for their own truth.